Welcome to Bat Therapy, mental health through the lens of comics and film. Be a fly on the wall or a bat in the cave, listening in on a friendship built out of a love for talking Batman, comics, and the everyday struggle to achieve mental health and happiness.
We're your hosts, clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown and educator and comic aficionado Keaton Hopkins. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube and social media and find our Patreon at patreon.com/battherapy.
This podcast is about providing education and understanding and is not a replacement for mental health treatment or support. If you're needing help, go to bat-therapy.com for resources. Okay, so Psychology Spotlight. Agatha All Along. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on in there. So I think it was the timing of when I read I read an article, and it might have been right when I was watching Agatha All Along, but spoiler alert, blah, 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 blah. If you haven't watched Agatha All Along, I'm about to spoil literally things that come up in like the last episode or two. So here's your chance to pause. Since this is one of the newer things we're talking about, I figured I'd give a longer pause. Okay. You've had your chance. Now it gets spoiled. So one of the really interesting things about the whole premise of this show is that you discover that the Witch's Road is actually a manifestation of Billy's imagination, essentially, and that it's his magic. He's pulling one of his mama's tricks, even to the point where he's not realizing it, which is very much like Wanda.
Yes, very much.
So, yeah. So the whole idea of he's got all these things he's trying to work through and process through, and then he literally creates this manifestation where he is walking the path and working through all of these things to try and come out the other side, reconnect with his brother, all of that. Made me think a bit about, was it last season or the season before? Remember when we chatted with my friend, Carolyn Cohagen, who was writing the comic book. We talked a lot about AI and technology and everything. And so right around the time I was watching Agatha All Along, I was reading about this really cool research they're doing with a new treatment they're trying out for psychosis.
Okay.
So it's specifically for hearing voices and obviously distress with hearing those voices, because not everyone that hears voices has having issues with them. But if people are seeking out help and treatment for them, and there's this new treatment that they've been developing for, gosh, I don't know, less than 10 years, but more than 5, I think, over in England. And it's called Avatar. And what's really interesting with it is the person sits down with their therapist and develops an avatar. Like they develop a face and a voice to match the voice that's bothering them, that they're hearing. They talk it over with their therapist. Here's what the voice says to me. Here are the issues that I'm having with it. And so they develop it, and the sessions are literally the therapist will go and enact the voice with the avatar for the client.
Okay.
And essentially help the client be able to face the auditory hallucination, the voice that they've been hearing, so that they can work through what's going on with that voice, as opposed to it just being kind of this amorphous thing. And it really just made me think about how Billy, like, he took all of these things that are bothering him in his mind, and obviously he's not aware of what's going on, but essentially trying to do a similar thing, right? Is creating a physical manifestation that he can work through and process. So it made me think of this really cool research out there. It's essentially one of those newer treatments that they're trying out that so far it's looking good. So
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it tends to help with reducing the distress that people have with the voices. And then for people who are doing the treatment for longer periods, it looks like potentially it might help reduce the amount of voices that they hear as well. So it's really cool research. And it really had me thinking like, hey, maybe Billy's subconscious had something going there.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's pretty cool that. I'm always blown away whenever there's a new method of treatment that comes out with something that's so like there's already such a stigma with it. And so it's always really interesting when someone comes up with something that's non-medicinal.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on medicinally that they look into. And one of my friends was talking about they're looking at some things, I think, with like breaking apart cannabis. And are there certain components of it that might be helpful for things with psychosis? There are parts that are not good for psychosis. You kind of have to break down its pieces to see. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff medicinally that people look into. But obviously, for me, the non medicinal is particularly of interest. What are things that we can do with our thoughts and our behaviors and our feelings and our reactions to things? And how can we use what we have at our disposal to try and maneuver and manipulate things more to our benefit? But yeah, it is really it's nice to see. So one of the things that I think is really helpful with this stuff too is let's say you have Billy plop down in your therapy in your office and you find out, oh man, this is someone whose thoughts become so intense. Not only does he believe things that are not based in reality, but he can actually like conjure them essentially so that they are reality, but they're also not reality. It's a weird thing. So if you had this guy sit down in front of you, there's probably some sort of psychosis stuff that you're like, okay, there's something with that
Something's
going
going on, of
on, but add some magic in that
course.
makes it hard to diagnose. Right. And so one of the things that is you were talking about, things that are more stigmatized or we tend to not understand as well. So with psychosis, what the trend tends to be is you come up with treatments for things that more of the population have, like depression or anxiety or PTSD or things like that. And then you go, I don't, let's be careful doing this stuff with the people with psychosis because we are afraid that it might make things worse. That tends to be a trend that actually happens quite a bit. I was actually in a training recently for mindfulness, which is going to be really helpful to help me like improve my mindfulness skills with us. But I was in a mindfulness training and someone had a very understandable question. They were like, I've heard that you really need to be careful doing mindfulness with someone with psychosis. So when I first started training and I remember I had someone who had psychosis. I can't remember if it's schizophrenia or something else. And I was like, this is someone where like maybe some mindfulness might be good. And I remember researching on it and seeing those concerns. People saying you want to be careful you want to be careful that you don't kind of confuse things since there's this confusion with reality that can happen. These theoretical things that you can understand where someone's coming from, that they want to be cautious. They don't want to accidentally make things worse. But usually what happens is we actually limit using effective treatments for people with psychosis because we're too cautious. So there's no evidence that mindfulness is harmful for people with psychosis. Some people are more concrete thinkers. So like, for example, just like with autism, you might have someone who might need things more black and white or take things very literally, or same thing with psychosis. Sometimes you might have folks where just the way that they talk actually can feel pretty similar to autism at times. So if you have someone who's more concrete, they're not as good at the abstract stuff, that might affect what kinds of mindfulness or what kinds of treatment you use. But that's not everyone with psychosis, right? So you might adjust things in different ways, but all of these different treatments that work in other places actually over time, when we look at them with psychosis, tend to be really helpful. Another example being PTSD. So there used to be a lot of hesitation to do PTSD treatment with someone with psychosis. But actually, if you're able to do the PTSD treatment, the psychosis improves along with the PTSD because everything is all tied together. So it is really cool when these new treatments come out, especially when it's encouraging something new and different with psychosis, because a lot of times people tend to be more cautious and it's coming from a good place of caring and not wanting to exacerbate things, but it can lead to restricting our knowledge and ability to actually treat someone. So, with Billy, I don't know. Once again, if he came into the office, it'd be like, oh, you're like kind of psychosis-y, but I don't really know where you fit, just like his mama.
Yeah.
And obviously, Agatha, let's just say she just rode the wave of everything going on. She seemed to know what was happening and not really. She let him just kind of figure it out on his own, it felt like. But if you
Definitely.
If you traded Agatha out for a therapist who is maybe trying to help him connect the dots of what he was doing, it could be really cool. I mean,
Yes, definitely. I could see that.
right? The Witch's Road could have actually been an even more, I don't know, a more therapeutic thing for him and
Like an
helping him
interactive
process
kind
a
of
lot of
thing.
stuff.
Yeah. Like, okay.
Yeah.
Well, and the thing is, when I was watching it, I always kind of thought about, like, okay, what does this secretly mean to him? Right. And
Right.
even at the
Exactly.
end, you see like how it compares to his room. All the
Yes.
posters, all the figurines, the Broadway show stuff, like everything is that was part of the Witch's Road was in some form, something in his room that was like pulled into
Yes.
this reality.
Which is so much like not just psychosis, but a lot of the things that end up causing people problems. This comes up in PTSD a lot, for example, where our reactions or how we think about things, it's so tied to all of these other connections behind us that if you're not paying attention, you don't realize. Just like what happens with Billy, where not until the end does he look around his room and he goes, "Oh my God," and starts connecting those dots together. Exactly like you're talking about. So with this new treatment, what they've mentioned is that a lot of times as people go with the avatar, they'll start realizing that there's like their own things that have happened in their lives or their own ways of thinking about themselves or internal dialogues that are related to what's going on with the voice. And so being able to interact with the voice a little bit more directly and having the time to process through all of these things can help make those connections. Yeah, those kinds of with Billy, it was really cool to see because that's honestly that's kind of what therapy is all about, right? Is like you're going down the road and at least half of it is of our own making, right? Our perceptions are so much a part of our reality and you've got to slow down and look around to realize like okay, let me see where all these things tie together.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah, that's pretty cool. And I never even thought about it. Like, with the Witch's Road, it was definitely one of those things like, huh, this is an interesting journey that they're on. And it kept having me pose so many questions, which is
Mm,
what ends up happening in therapy. A lot of times
sure.
it's not about them telling you what you should do. It's more like, hey, let me ask you this. And
Yeah.
it gets you thinking. And
Yep.
so it was very interesting how all that all played out.
Yeah. And I mean fortunately with therapy it's well, so the cool thing about some of the AI stuff coming out is they are trying to take it beyond the talking. So the cool thing about the Witch's Road is it's like a complete sensory experience. You are plopped into everything going on. Versus talk therapy is you talking to somebody. I mean, there could be exposures and there are different variations of it. And depending like exposure therapy, for example, you might be going physically certain places, for example. But a lot of it has to do with the conversations, working with memories or those types of things. But with things like Avatar and other AI incorporations and simulations and things, they are trying to make it more of a sensory experience and seeing what toying around with what happens with that. So a lot of like virtual reality type stuff. When it comes to the technology, there's a lot of people toying around with things like avatars, things like
Hmm.
virtual reality. Some people are toying around with AI. I do have to put a warning out there for AI though, because I mean, once again, go back to that episode we did with my friend Carolyn because we chatted about this quite a bit. But with the AI, the tricky thing is that you're getting information that isn't filtered through an expert, and so unfortunately, depending on how that information's based, you could get a lot of bad stuff. Like there was a psychiatrist who talked about pretending to be a teenager using an AI chatbot to deal with suicidality, and it did not go down a good road. So you got to be careful.
Right. Tread lightly.
Tread lightly. It's better to do it with an expert or, a clinician or something if you're toying around with these things. So be careful on your own, but there is a lot of ways that they're toying around with using technology to kind of get you more I mean, not so far into the witch's road where you can die,
Hmm.
but make it a more whole person, whole body experience, which for some people might be a lot more poignant, maybe help move them along more.
Okay. I got you. That's pretty cool. And like, it kind of reminds me of, do you remember in Captain America Civil War when Tony is using the AI thing, or like it's something is virtually generated where it's young him talking to his parents for the last time before they leave.
Yeah, 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 yeah. He's like wearing goggles or something, or no?
Yeah, it was
It's
something.
at
It
the tech
was
show.
Yeah, it was at like a tech expo at MIT.
Yes.
And yeah, he was using it to basically, it was going to be used to help people get closure.
Yeah. There is a lot of, use of imagination talking to past self, or maybe talking to others that aren't readily available, or maybe it's not healthy to talk to them directly, where like the imagination can be really helpful. And yeah, Tony had an inkling there. Now, like, hopefully he had a therapist or somebody involved in the process, because
I mean, Vision was right there.
yeah, yeah, sure, I'm sure he understands the human condition perfectly.
Yeah,
uh, just to say that going back and replaying memories or changing the script or something in and of itself without any guide can be precarious depending on the situation. And I could see Tony taking himself down a
definitely.
tricky road if he didn't have the proper guidance. But
Yeah, of
yeah, I had
course.
totally forgotten about that scene. There's absolutely ways where making things more accessible, whether it's something that's literally impossible, and so it's up to the imagination,
Hmm.
or um, doing exposures and making those exposures more realistic to really help
Hmm.
retrain the brain. Um, or I've heard of some ways too where they're trying to help people with like more social connection, being able to connect to other people in a more virtual way. There's a lot of really cool ways that, yeah, I think they're trying to just make it more of a full experience.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, and it's interesting because it's with stuff like that, it's going to start to blur the lines between, I think, what you end up having to go to school for as a therapist. Because in that realm, it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, you're definitely have to be trained in how to be a therapist, but now also possibly IT, possibly coding. Like there's
Oh
so
God.
much that goes into it. It reminds me of when I was doing my first master's in genetics. So many of the geneticists, in order to use the programs for like bioinformatics, they had to be able to code. So half of them had
Oh.
masters in something in the computer field just so they were able to code the programs to break down the information in genetics. And so, like,
Maybe
yeah.
so there's like a running joke, like psychologists, and it might be all mental health profession, I don't know, but for psychologists there's like a joke. You like either marry another, you either end up with another psychologist, or you go the extreme opposite and you end up with like an engineer or a computer person or what. And obviously I went with the computer person, thank God, because if there's any future coding in my therapy future, hey Bill.
There we go. Our producer.
I'm just like picturing him like editing this episode and being like, oh God, Amelia coding. Like, we can't afford the amount of holes she would punch in a wall out of frustration. Because even therapists aren't perfect, everyone. But you're totally right that what's needed from a discipline absolutely changes over time. And there's in terms of therapy, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here, but I mean, theories change and how training happens has adapted over time, but a lot of it has still maintained a lot of like,
Stood the test of time, the
so
framework.
yeah, in terms of like, hey, you're talking to a person in this private space doing blah, 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 blah. I mean, there are variations and things, but I do think you're right that the introduction of more of the technology is going to lend to like different things. So maybe for some people it might end up with like coding or other things, but I definitely think teaming up with
Hmm.
people on the tech side, one, to make sure that things that are in development are ethical and effective. Like I was mentioning before, you got to be careful, but also being able to understand what are things capable of.
Hmm.
Um, There's a ton of smartphone apps that are out there that are really cool to incorporate into clinical work. There's growing like avatar spaces and other things like that. The chatbots and AI stuff isn't going away. I've got my issues with all of that because I know it's like sucking the planet dry of energy. But, in terms of a concept, that's not going anywhere. And so how do you make sure, like APA is actually trying to work on, like, how do we make sure these things happen safely and effectively as best we can? So yeah, you can't really ignore the technology. And so it will, yeah, I think you're totally right. It's going to be interesting to see where things go in terms of training and skill sets in the future. And also the technology is going to get better and better where maybe people care less and less if it's a human on the other side of things.
We did that in one of our DC, the comic where the superheroes had like robot therapists.
Heroes in Crisis?
Yeah.
Still one of my favorites. I'm going to have to reread that soon. I haven't read it since then, I don't think. Yeah, the robot therapists. It is interesting because there's so much stuff that's easily accessible with technology. And then at the end of the day, it does seem like for most of us, even if you like couldn't tell the difference for the most part, most people would still prefer the person for certain things.
Yeah,
when it
absolutely.
comes to like mental health and connection and therapy. But
Well,
who knows when
absolutely.
that'll change?
And well, I think it's just because like there's this idea that the person on the other end actually cares
Yeah.
versus a machine. It's like, if you unplugged it, it wouldn't be your therapist anymore. Like it's
Yeah.
one of those things where you like, I'm talking to someone that's going to give me hopefully an unbiased opinion, but at least I know like, hey, they're here for me because I'm paying them to be. Like, and
So, I will say that potentially in a lore that is not exactly true, but an allure that could be there for things that are more technology based is they have more of an appearance of lacking bias. And I worded that way because it's still based on data input by humans.
that's yes.
So I don't know if it's possible to have things that are truly unbiased. Now, with technology, in certain ways, there are better guarantees of reliability. So in terms of like, I know what to expect and what I'll get, you can potentially be more secure when it comes to the technology, depending on how it's built. Now, AI stuff, who knows where that's going to send things, but versus people, one of the frustrations people, I can't tell you the amount of people that I've worked with that it's like, they talk about how hard it is to find someone that's a good fit for them. There are pros and cons probably to each one. It's going to be interesting to see where things go. Hopefully in 20 years, it's still possible for me to do this as a human. I guess we'll
just
see.
upload your brain to the cloud.
There you go.
Doc Brown.
I'll just hang out on the Witch's Road, just waiting for the next group to come by and be like, hey, let's have a good time.
Anytime I'm having a bad day, just open you up in a new tab.
There you go.
Thanks for nerding out with us. I'm clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown.
And I'm educator and comic aficionado Keaton Hopkins. Check out my TV and movie reviews on YouTube at Team JVS. Check out our website at bat-therapy.com, our Bat Therapy YouTube channel, and follow us on social media. And don't forget our Patreon page at patreon.com/battherapy. See you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.